I'm Makenzie, and I wanted to talk a little bit about my process and my part in this exhibition, Infinite Gauge. All of my projects and the projects that I work on with Adam, they always start with research and investigation into sort of like what happened at the site where the work is taking place. And so for this particular project, I had just, both Adam and I, we had just lived through the hurricane and flooding as a result of Hurricane Helene in North Carolina, where we live now. And so flooding was very much a part of our thought process with this, and also like how we treat and respond to the rivers. So I really was interested in looking through archives. We looked through the University of Southern Indiana archives and the Working Men. We also were able to access the Working Men's Institute archives and got to spend a day there looking at some of the images. So once I found that body of work that I wanted to engage with in those archives, I decided that cyanotype on glass was a process I would use for that. And this isn't an image that's in the show, but this is the process itself. And the reason I love this process is I'm increasingly worried about ecological concerns and trying to push my photographic processes into more ecological and sustainable ways of making. And a cyanotype on glass is really sustainable. For the chemicals are pretty innocuous. You can put them in you can dump them down the drain. They're not bad for the environment. And then using glass, if you mess up, you can just wash it off and start again. And so that's one of the reasons that I like using this process. But the other is that it is this blue color by nature. And on glass, it's really tricky though, because you need to use a gel medium, like a gelatin rather, kind of just like this old photographic process where gelatin needs to be in the process to actually stick to the glass. So you're pouring the gelatin and the cyanotype onto the plate, and then I use a digital negative in some cases, or negatives that I created myself from like a 4x5 camera or a large format camera. And then you're printing using UV light to make the exposure on the image. And that's those blue images on glass. So I find that using glass as well is a way to both, it has a lot of similar qualities that water has, that a river has. It reflects, it can obscure information, and you can also look through it. And I love this idea of using glass as a lens to sort of think through these bigger problems that we encounter with some of our natural resources, and not even natural resources, these really important places in our world that we aren't always as responsible with as we'd like to be, I think. So that's why these are just one of the processes that I've engaged with for this show.
Hello, my name is Adam Stacey. I'm one of the artists in this show that is called Infinite Gauge. And I wanted to talk just kind of briefly about my art and the process of the work that I made in that exhibit. So for me, what I was finding is that as we were moving around through various locations and sites along the Wabash River, and at even different points in the White River, I was finding a lot of things in and along the side of the river. And oftentimes those things were like objects that were manufactured that would be considered, I guess, like almost like these empty containers or shells or like waste of our consumer culture that we live in. And that was something that I found really compelling and interesting, and I in a way I kind of felt like I was thinking about what would it be that we would be finding of ourselves as a future civilization if we were like finding objects in an archaeological way or something. So I wanted to reproduce those objects in a way that made sense, but also that in a way that showed us and sort of questioned our value systems, like in this world that we live in. So to do that, I decided that slip casting would be a really appropriate way to kind of approach that idea. And if you're not familiar with slip casting, what it is essentially like you're creating a mold of an object that then can be used to create like a negative shape of that object, and then that mold is put together, and then this kind of wet liquid ceramic material is poured into that mold, and it's made out of a porous plaster, and that plaster then absorbs some of that liquid, and it creates a little shell, a thin like hollow shell of hardened ceramic material. So you can dump out the rest of the liquid, and you end up with this almost like hollow form made out of ceramic. And in this case, in a lot of these works, it was porcelain that I was using for that process. But if you can kind of see here, this is a good example of it. But like this was one of the objects, and essentially this was like a kitty litter container, and you would kind of mix up this wet plaster material and then pour it in pieces around that object in a way that would allow it to be pulled out. And with a lot of the objects that I was working with, I found because they were consumer waste, they were actually manufactured in a similar way. So there were already seam lines often in the objects from the process of their original creation. So it seemed to make a lot of sense to try to remanufacture the things that I was making in the same way. And I really wanted to kind of bring those objects that we were finding, that people were basically throwing out into the world, back kind of into a place where we talk about value and think about value. And that's kind of essentially how I approached doing this. And so yeah, that was my part of it. So thank you very much for the opportunity, and that's all.